Well, hello everybody. It's Sunday on the long weekend, and I was just going to do a little video and see how many people I could upset today with the Lantana issue and the coronavirus and things like that. I tried to, my anger towards a lot of the greenies was related to my not being able to understand why they allowed the state government and the federal government councils to destroy so much habitat every single year. And within that, I guess I just couldn't comprehend how anybody that claimed that they were green would allow the destruction of 20 million hectares in the fires at the beginning of the year. And over the last 3 years, it's an endless chain, continuously, of massive fires coming off state government lands and nothing being done about it, nothing being said about it, which is quite usual. The Greens go very, very quiet the moment there's any serious fires around caused by the policies that have been in place. But I was talking to somebody today and realised that there's a very good possibility they just aren't educated, they don't know. So I thought, well, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt here. We'll make a video that explains a lot of the history around Lantana, and it's quite possible they really have been hoodwinked by Labor and the rest of the government departments within this situation, like blaming the farmers for every sin and ill that there is, and completely ignoring the real crime and the real material, which is the Lantana. So basically, across the world, with South Africa, India and Australia, they're all closely linked to monitor each other's progress over the last 100 years of documented Lantana work. And what ended up happening was many systems of misinformation came along through that course of action, because the Queensland Australian government were so hopeless at any success with Lantana that it became to be such a big embarrassment that they turned away from doing anything with it. And terms like management or control came up, and Lantana eradication went away. I've spent 4 years now constantly talking to these groups and trying to understand where all this rubbish came from. And naturally they don't want to talk about it. They really don't want to discuss these things because they're very, very contentious with them, because they just haven't had any success. Now, fire as a management tool with Lantana is non-success. It does more damage than good, and it continues to destroy more habitat rapidly. That's been known for the last 100 years, through India, through Australia, in the last 50 years through national parks or their other counterparts that they used to be, and things like that. They've been destroying habitat like it's going out of fashion, and nobody holds them accountable at all. In fact, when you look at the amount of lands destroyed, it's an incredible thing of history that nobody's done anything about it. They burn and they backburn to the main fire and kill every single living thing in that fire. The problem is, in the last 10 years, the fires have all been a 12 fire on a scale of 10, and no fire brigade or any fire services have ever held them accountable. All of them just keep saying, we can't understand why the fires are so large. But for 30 odd years, we've had a situation whereby, sun's pretty bad, isn't it? We've had a situation whereby these people have destroyed that much habitat. Like 20 million hectares in one session is a major catastrophe, and it's something that makes you wonder why people weren't screaming blue murder, or the crimes that they committed over on Bribey Island, where they destroyed the entire top of the island and killed every living thing on there, and it was all on film. The thing is, what happens is fire destroys the subsoil life. Now, that's been known for decades, for close on 100 years, okay? And even the consortium set up by the Premier and the state government to try and cover their tracks and claim that this is why we have these problems, because the fire management wasn't put in place and Indigenous fire management wasn't put in place, and the whole lot's a load of rubbish. No Indigenous relations were looking after country in the last 200 years. You know, we had to fight for land rights to get anywhere, and we're still nowhere. We're still in between everywhere. So Indigenous Australia's never fought the fight on Lantana. That's a load of garbage, and that's factually able to be proven. So this whole consortium group using books from Indigenous elders is an absolute lie. It's an absolute misleading situation, because within that situation they're only talking about a few leaves and things on the ground when they show you the fire management that they're talking about. They're not talking about Lantana infestations. You know, the amount of land that is completely consumed by Lantana on national parks lands is absolutely insane, you know, because they've had so long destroying this material. So it makes the big problem being trying to do anything else with the land and with the Lantana. I might try going around that way and see if I can get it better. Get the sun out of it. It's pretty bad now. I'm looking into the sun, so try there with the tree. See if we can get somewhere in between. Yep. Anyway, so that becomes a major problem. Fire's never been a good tool on Lantana, and it never will be, because it destroys the natural bushland and it promotes the Lantana, and that's been proven by national parks. They've done, you know, every single conceivable combination: hot fires, cold fires, you know, follow a cold fire by a hot fire, follow a hot fire by a couple of cold fires. They've destroyed that much habitat in our nation. They should be charged and prosecuted because of it. And that's without the stuff like Bribey Island that happened. That's absolutely a disgraceful killing of that many animals. But the problem is nothing lives under Lantana or in it once it reaches stage 2 and stage 3 infestations. So there was never an opportunity for this material to be called naturalised, which is what the national park, which the biosecurity try to play off and pass off. You can't have a material that's as destructive as this material and as costly and then claim that it's naturalised. The big thing with Lantana is that the councils have been operating illegally with biosecurity to circumvent environmental and biosecurity law, and that is in fact what the Premier set in motion. So they all claimed that the councils could run their own biosecurity plans. Now, if you go to your local council and you have a look at what the biosecurity plans are, you'll find they're about to change them very soon because of my work, because I've now turned the heat up on them that much, and many of them are facing jail and prosecution. When we have the next lot of fires, hopefully we'll see legal action taken against these people, and we'll be able to get some compensation for the families that lose loved ones, pets, livestock, homes, and everything else that goes with it, as well as their lands being completely destroyed. Because when you put fire through these lands, it then destroys the subsoil life. Now, the only difference between good quality soils and dirt, okay, poor quality soils, dirt, is the subsoil life, okay, and the organic matter in the soils. That's the only difference. Lantana destroys all of that. Okay, light never gets to the ground anymore where you've got stage 2 and stage 3 infestations, and nothing walks under the leaf litter. I've filmed for thousands and thousands of hours of these materials and spent 40 plus years, and I have no equal in the world, let alone in Australia, that can discuss this with me and hold a candle. In fact, biosecurity refuse to come to site and to inspect the illegal infestations on Crown lands, on TMR's lands, National Parks lands, on Water Board's lands, on correctional services lands, any of the state government lands. They refuse to. They say there's nothing to be learnt. And yet, again, I have no equal in the world in Lantana. So these people say that they don't have to come out and look at these illegal infestations being released into the environment, even though they're breaches of the Biosecurity Act. And that is the big problem that we have here. Although the state government, the Premier, lowered the classification of Lantana around 2016 illegally, okay, and created the environmental disaster that we now face. See, the fires are not an environmental disaster. They were caused by the Lantana. This stuff burns like petrol. I remove it and I run 3 fires altogether, and then I have to keep running the 3 fires to keep some normality in the fires and not lose control of them. But this stuff burns like petrol. It's terrible. And then once you put it into steep country and you've allowed it to grow like the national parks for the last 30 to 50 years, illegally, and invade everybody else's properties, then you have major problems. So hopefully in the future, as these fires make the ones in the beginning of the year look like nothing, we will start seeing the court system overwhelmed with these people being prosecuted for their criminal actions. Okay, the Premier's set this in place to try to allow the councils to circumvent environmental law for the fact of saving money. That was why it was all done. But under Section 263 of the Biosecurity Act, okay, saying that you have no money is not a legal defence. Okay, you cannot claim you don't have the money to meet your legal obligations as far as Lantana Camara is concerned. Now, because of the actions of the Premier and the councils, every one of these separate incidences, infestations, are actually an aggravated offence under Section 27 of the Biosecurity Act. Now, the fact that Mark Furner's office refused to meet with me, have done for well over 2 years. In fact, I've never actually had a meeting with them, even though I've asked continuously in the letters I've written to them, my complaints about the Biosecurity Department. They still refuse continuously to actually meet and discuss these issues of these illegal infestations pouring onto private lands, which is illegal under the Biosecurity Act, and he's responsible for the Biosecurity Act. So very soon I'm going to put in a complaint to the CCC, and we'll see how those people fare within that system, because I believe we'll find that they actually are going to have a very, very, very bad day. But it's a matter of getting the information to you, because at the end of the day, you've got to understand, this corruption from the Premier and her departments that they control, National Parks, TMR, all of these monies that they were supposed to be spending on the environment under Section 263 of the Biosecurity Act, have meant that millions of hectares of land have been destroyed by Lantana before fires in Queensland, in New South Wales, and they flow right across those lands onto your lands, right, onto local government lands. Now that becomes your problem. It becomes your problem when your land's flowing down the watercourses off the road, straight through your property, and then you have infestations that you're responsible for. And the councils say that they will take action against you, but they will not take action against the state government departments, because there's unwritten laws that state that they will not take action against any government entity on any of the three levels of government. None of them will take action against the other. And I can prove that corruption to the CCC. So let's see if the CCC is as unbiased as what it's supposed to be, and if it actually functions. Because I've made these complaints to the Attorney General's office continuously, and nothing ever gets done about these issues. Now, when you look at the levels of devastation being caused and the fires that come off that devastation, we no longer see lands that are damaged by fires. They are complete destruction of those lands, and they flow across our lands, and we pay the price for that criminal activities between the councils and the state government. Now, I have huge amounts of documents from Mark Ferner's office and the Premier's office, in which the Premier actually stated it nearly 2 years ago that she was aware that the councils were operating illegally and misleading the public in stating that they were operating under low risk, and in other cases very low risk in the case of the Brisbane City Council and Logan. Now some of these councils are really, really bad. All of this low risk and very low risk has to be explained, but that's a separate video on its own. But the Premier stated that she was well and truly aware that Lantana was never low risk. She'd never ever, in the entire time she'd been in politics, ever spoken of Lantana as low risk, which is interesting when she lowered the classification on it, isn't it? That's a very interesting situation to do that illegally, because it's illegal for anybody to create a environmental disaster, right, either by their actions or their failure to act. Now the Premier had 2 years ago the information that the councils were doing this, and they were circumventing environmental law. Now councils often said that Lantana was not that bad and that there were much worse weeds out there. Well, now we have different facts in place that we know that's a load of rubbish. Okay, the top 10 universities in Australia listed Lantana as the most damaging invasive species to endangered species. Okay, and the nearest other vegetation was 50% less than the Lantana was, so it's number one on the list. Okay, so you've got to try to understand why a council would lie to the public to that level. I've had meetings with 3 of the top people from Moreton Bay Regional Council that said that they were working off the old Lands Act. That was last year, in May last year, and yet the Lands Act's been defunct for a very long time, and the actual act that they work under is the Biosecurity Act 2014. Now, why would somebody be telling you 12 months ago that this was what they were working off, the old Lands Act? You know, now I've got the new heads of council to admit that no, that's wrong, and you must have been talking to somebody very low ranked. They were shocked and horrified to find out exactly the names of the people that it actually was. You know, the koala person responsible for all koalas throughout the Shire, and a couple of the other very high ranking people. And that wasn't an accident that they were trying to mislead me at that point, which, you know, I have no equal in the world. Why these people try to play that game is foolish. But until I remove from the councils their ability to say we were poorly trained and we didn't understand, and, you know, it's all the council's fault because our bosses told us to lie to the public, until I remove that from their criteria, then we have this problem of what they are putting in place there. So that's important to get out there and change, and hopefully the CCC will cement that. Now, councils were saying that Lantana's, you know, too expensive to remove. Okay, all of these things are really, really lies, because when you look at what the cost of Lantana is, I'll just try and sit this, oops, sorry, going the wrong way. Let's try and sit this up here so I can hold my hand steadier. So when we look at this stuff, we see that if I said to you an acre of Lantana will cost you $5,000 to remove, okay, and eradicate. Now that's just a ballpark figure on just random areas, you know, medium sort of terrain. So okay, so it's worth $5,000 to remove. Now if you don't remove that, after 12 months you get 400 new plants off every plant on that acre of Lantana. Okay, so the council's just told you it's too expensive to remove. And these are their facts, okay? They openly say that it can cost anywhere between 4 times the eradication cost and 10 times the eradication cost to rehabilitate an area that's been decimated by Lantana. Okay, so we're looking at that. So after you have that, you got 1,800 plants consume an acre of Lantana. By 400 plants, it gives you 720,000 plants from Lantana in 1 year, and that never turns off. Okay, the next year it'll be 720,000 plants times 400, and then it'll be, yeah, and it keeps going and going and going. But let's step back and just look at that very basic mathematics, okay? So that Lantana then is 720,000 divided by the 1800 to put it back into acres, and you're back to 400 acres of Lantana from one single acre of Lantana. Then put $5,000 an acre on it, and you've got $2 million problem came from one $5,000 problem on your property. Most of you will end up finding that that material came onto your property off Crown lands. So the infestation actually came to you, it wasn't yours, and your lands were consumed at that level. Now you can see if you leave it another year and another year, you've got major problems at the first year, haven't you? It goes to $2 million problem, okay? And that doesn't take into consideration any of the other garbage that the government departments who are clueless on Lantana put on top of you. To say some of these things from Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy in the rehabilitation side of it can be anything from 4 times to 10 times the cost of the eradication process. It's absolutely ridiculous. My systems have very, very unique systems that I've been using for 40 plus years. So, you know, you can't afford to go down the governmental systems, and they need to change them. And I need to write the book on how that's done and what areas are done, because we've got too many cowboys running through and just doing whatever they want, and it's illegal. And if you have that done on your land and get busted, then you'll be paying the fines and the rehabilitation processes on top of what you got fined. So it's a nightmare out there in Lantana, and the government has a real responsibility to turn around and want to do this correctly and have the right people, you know, with a set of code of practice that meets a very defined outcome. But anyway, so you got that. You know, just after 1 year, you've gone from a $5,000 problem to a $2 million problem. In the very near future, you're going to find that a lot of that material is flowing off your land, the same as the government did onto your land. You're now flowing onto the next person's land downstream. Very soon, these fires will result in court action, and people will start suing each other, even if they don't join together, which is what they should do, and sue the government for the compensation and the losses across those lands. So you can imagine if most of your stuff washes off your land next time it rains and the seeds float, which is what I proved in 2018. I wrote the book on this stuff. So the seeds float, they then float downstream, and there's no limit to how far they float. So, you know, you're infesting your neighbour illegally. That's the 3rd section of the Biosecurity Act. You cannot allow this material to leave your land and infest your people downstream. Now, why weren't the council taking action on this? It all started from the state governments. They're all the ones that have the land that is above everybody else. So the national parks and the TMR lands along the side of the road, which is the highest level of infestation. Because every time Lantana gets 25 millimetres of water, the greenies don't understand this. It reseeds and reseeds and reseeds. So that's just a normal dry area Lantana will seed at 400 new plants. In the wet areas, like the sides of the roads, down watercourses, they're spreading at around 6,000 new plants per plant. So these fires, as I keep telling you, are going to get much, much worse, because these materials are endlessly spreading. And the worst thing the councils did was they took you, the public, the greenies, the climate change people, out of the picture by telling you it was low risk. You heard low risk and went, well, I don't have to worry about it, it's low risk. When in fact, low risk meant they had no clue how to deal with it. They've never been successful in eradication. You can ask any council in Australia and they will tell you that they have never been successful in eradication at all at any stage of their history. That's why they use the words low risk. Now, why did the Premier allow this to happen? Well, that's because they own 85% of the infestations. That's why. But the court system says they can't do this. So why weren't the judges taking action against the state government? This information was taken to the Attorney General's office. Like, surely she has a standing in this to meet the legal requirements for the nation. You know, when we're talking about, let's just take, for instance, specific areas so you can understand this. So the road from Petrie out through Daybra to Sanford, and then Daybra to Mount Mee is 700 acres of the worst infestations you would never want to see, okay, in lands that material can never be on. Moreton Bay Regional Council has never taken action against TMR. In fact, in the conversations I've had with their heads, they've all said, well, if we write to TMR, they'll tell us to pee off. And we don't want them to tell us to pee off, when in fact I'm pretty certain the conversation went more like the councils do the slashing for TMR. And TMR most likely said, sit the hell down and shut up if you want to keep doing our slashing work. Their legal responsibilities from Moreton Bay Regional Council, from Brisbane City Council, are to the public and to their residents. It's not to the Premier and the state government. And you've got to understand what I started to say to you before, and I was very clear about that. These materials are all on the high country, all on the roads around us, and they flow onto your lands. You are the end user. You are being infested. You are the one that wears the costs for that material on your lands. And they will take action against you. Many of you are frightened of me because what I'm saying means that you have a very serious financial problem. But your financial problems are going to get a lot worse, because I've been saying for a long time, these fires will get worse by a long shot in a very short period of time. They're going to make the ones in the beginning of the year look like babies. And at that point, the government will eventually turn on you, and it will have to fix this. And at that point, just as all governments do, they will have no mercy, and they will not care about morality. The only thing you can do at this time is to start to make them put the fire breaks around your properties and clean up these roads to clean these materials out of there, as they should have. It's like the Premier says that she's not a fan of the people being taxed to clean this material up, nor should she be. These state government departments have been milking the money off those funds all the way along. Under Section 263 of the Biosecurity Act, it says that saying they don't have the funding, as National Parks has been stating for the past 5 years, and continuously, is not a legal defence. Then why was it that the councils allowed them to do that? Allowed these materials to become your problems in your local community? Can you imagine the cost to you as they've let this material continue to swarm down off Mount Mee, to swarm all the way along those roads? You know, I've got film footage of properties that had next to nothing inside their fence lines, completely covered in the roads, and maybe the property sold and the farmers moved on, and other people have bought the properties, but now those properties are absolutely inundated by Lantana in the last 2 years. Illegally, completely illegally. And yet if people make a complaint to the council, they get all this dribble from the council talking to them about these things, and nothing gets done because they're so good at misleading you. You don't know what I know, so you don't know what your legal rights are. But unless you start changing this, the cost to you and your family when the fires come through, because that's what the fires will track downstream. That's the problem with linking all of these bushes together, as the koala misinformation lists it to do, okay? You are creating a death trap for your entire family. Not the wildlife. Forget the wildlife at this point. That's something you need to go back to and say, well, Why would the koalas have to come to our lands to survive when we have millions, 13 million hectares of land being destroyed by the national parks? Why would we have to have the koalas on our lands? It's because the Premier gets free slave labour to look after those lands. She doesn't have to pay them. National parks are destroying that much land, and there's no chance of them ever getting on top of it. That's why we have to create the National Capital Works program, and I have to head it. I'm the only person in the world with the knowledge and the ability to save billions of dollars to our nation, but we will have this war. There is no doubt about it, because the fires are the part that are the canary in the coal mine. They will just continue to get much worse, and we are losing that much habitat in single fires, forget about the ones that join together, than we have ever lost in our history. And yet all of this has been known. It just is something I've not been able to comprehend, why the Greens have not been all over this. But the Greens won't come out to site and do the tour with me and have a look. I've issued that challenge 100 times and said, come on guys, come out and I'll take you on a tour and we'll have a look at this and I'll explain how it moves. I'll explain what it does. And none of them are interested. But the one thing that has to be understood is that the government, the not-for-profit organisations that are in scam with the government, they're being fed funds from the councils, and every single one of them is run by an ex-council worker or an ex-state government worker. There is so much corruption going on in this, and the money being wasted. And it's just poured into these things, and volunteers are being placed in harm's way with the tick disease, okay? But that's a whole other video on its own once again. So what we have to do is end up in the position where we can actually take the governments to task with this. Hopefully the Triple C will see this through, and they'll hold these people accountable who have been circumventing the environmental law. But the Premier says that the councils are the ones who are solely responsible for inspection and then handing out breach notices. Then why have they not done that in the last 3 years, 4 years that I've been chasing them down and proving to them and showing them that the amount of materials growing on the sides of the roads are posing such a threat to everybody's lands? They don't understand anything about Lantana. They don't understand anything about the spread rate of Lantana. They've never been successful in ever working on Lantana on any scale at all. Okay? Then why would they be responsible for being the police to make national parks and TMR operate legally, and correctional services and every other government agency, water board, the whole lot of them are operating illegally? Why is that? And why is the Premier so willing to do that, to allow that to happen? It's the real questions that the Greenies need to ask, because the Greenies are the ones that I've been angry at, because I haven't been able to understand why they allowed it to all happen. But then that's the reality, isn't it? The Greenies never did know. They trusted the politicians, they trusted Labor. They were promised all these things by Palaszczuk and her cronies and the New South Wales Premier, and by the Prime Minister, and none of it was true. In fact, these people are the worst criminals our nation's ever known. The damage been done in these times that I've been chasing this down is staggering, and it's just simple mathematics. Okay, when you look at that, the growth factor on one single acre, and you're talking about 700 acres of illegally grown lantana pouring off the worst infestation places you could ever allow them to grow, and the Moreton Bay Regional Council's been completely complicit to that. Brisbane City Council, Logan Council, every single council from the Daintree to the Victorian border has been complicit in this corruption with the state government and the premiers. The problem is the fires are the canary in the coal mine, and they will be much worse in these years to come forward until we deal with these issues. And dealing with these issues are going to be the only way your family's going to be safeguarded into the future with the deaths that are coming, which is quite obscene when you look at it, that 20 million hectares got destroyed and 1 billion animals got destroyed, and we lost probably what I think it was about 60 people, and that's horrific. But really look at that, 1 billion animals, and nobody said a word before it. The fireys don't say a word because they don't have a clue as to how and why this happened. I've made video after video on that, why the fires were so intense. I've worked my butt off for 4 years, writing to the premiers and the prime ministers to set this timeline in place so that sooner or later, these people are going to be held accountable for their crimes. The animals and the people that they got killed are going to have their day in court, and hopefully they'll have some compensation for it. But it's, I'd rather save people's lives before they pay the price. And the stupidity of us going to run a royal commission that's already admitted that they are not interested in the facts of how these things happened and why they happened. They are only interested in the goody two-shoes notion of helpful hints and helpful ideas. Well, why did we pay this money for this whitewash from the Prime Minister to try and set himself apart from what he already knew? It's in documents. I can show you the letters. It's in documents that were written to the guy. He has nowhere to hide in this. And he was offered to take that tour, to come to Brisbane and Queensland. He's been up here many times. He met with the koala mobs to do fancy deals with those guys. Now, you cannot manage this. I'll just give you a couple of things for free and finish this up on this, and then we'll go with another video after this and start to, put more weight on them through the CCC and through the that format, and hopefully we'll actually get some people charged for their actions. So with the hold on, I've lost my train of thought now, haven't I? What we really need to have investigated with the CCC is why is the biosecurity claiming they have no field staff. They're not responsible for enforcing the Biosecurity Act, and that falls, according to them and according to the Premier, directly on the heads of the councils. And yes, I totally understand and accept the councils have been operating illegally for decades. But why is it solely their responsibility? It has to be, the Biosecurity Act is equally enforced by biosecurity. It only makes sense. If you got that name, you'd have to, or supposedly, be the experts in the Act, in understanding the Act. And yet, both lots of individuals have circumvented environmental law and biosecurity law, and knowingly done it against the worst infestors and worst culprits of our nation, and that is national parks and TMR. And they use the excuse that those entities, including councils, don't have the funds to be able to deal with these issues. But they did have the funds. It's in the law that they are responsible for dealing with these materials. See, by the very fact of the mathematics I laid out for you, you start to understand that the only way you protect the environment is by actually protecting the environment to start with. Okay, you have to educate the public to not allow lands to be infested in the first place. That's the simplest way that you hold against these materials. Now, what I was going to say to you had to do with, you cannot manage Lantana and you cannot control Lantana. There's a whole new misleading thing been done by the government to bring into power this Koala Act, which is supposed to be their way of circumventing biosecurity into the future, in which they now have limits on how much Lantana can be removed. Now, these people say that the maximum Lantana you can remove is 15%. You see why I have these problems with the government? You see why? The incompetence, the clueless nature of every single department. There's 4 departments that's job it was to protect the environment, to stop the spread of this material into new lands. But it's a breach if it's increasing on your land. or on their lands. It's a breach. So they should have been dealing with it, and they never were. Now, when you watch the expansion rates of Lantana, a single acre of Lantana is increasing at 400%, the same as a single plant. So can you get your head around that? As a greenie, you're supposed to be protecting the environment. You care about the trees, you care about the animals, you care about all of the life and fauna. And here you have a material that increases at 400%. And your councils, the ones that you're in bed with, and the state government that you're in bed with, went forward and said, oh, we'll create a new document to protect the koalas, and the maximum you'll be allowed to remove is 15%. You can't understand that mathematics doesn't work. You cannot control or manage Lantana. The only way you can do it is to eradicate it. It's easy to eradicate. It's even cost effective to eradicate. And on the costs of properties, it's actually the only way forward, because we now see properties that are selling for 50% less when they're infested by Lantana and the neighbouring properties that are infested by Lantana. So if you had $1 million property, just on an average thing, it's easiest math, it's only worth $500,000. And you might have a $100,000 infestation, and many of them will only be in the $20,000, $30,000, $50,000. And you're losing $500,000 because you don't spend, let's say, the $100,000. Only somebody in council or the state government could actually understand that mathematics and make sense of it. I mean, the greatest idiots in the world are in the vegetation departments within the government. And that's why I said, I've got to educate these people. I've got to get to the point where I call the shots and educate these people and hold them accountable, because at no other level will you ever get money for value and actually get action on these things. You know, you look at the Lockyer Valley on Google Earth and you will see absolute decimation, and that's what the entire state is going to look like in a very short amount of time. When you have 6,000 per plant expansion rates on the sides of roads, and your state government allows councils to circumvent the law because it suits the state government. Your Premier breaches the Biosecurity Act and any sort of morality in allowing these materials to continue to expand on the lands that she controls. And she expects the councils to go after these entities. Shouldn't have to. Those entities should have been doing the job in the first place. Why has not the state government taken action against their own departments then? The Premier's known about this for 3 years. She's said those state government departments, it's up to them to do the right thing. Well, they haven't done the right thing. They've never changed to do the right thing. When would the Premier expect for them to change and do the right thing? Why are the Greenies still in bed with these people? Why haven't they woken up to what the devastation of this Lantana is? You're talking about fires where this material makes up 4,000 to 50,000 cubic metres per acre. And then the fire brigade can't understand why every fire is a size 12 in a 10 scale fire. You know, they can't tell you the truth. They're not allowed to. The fire service doesn't run on a democratic society value. They're not allowed to make the state government look bad. They're not allowed to tell you the truth. I've been to their what's-her-names with Moreton Bay Regional Council on Mount Glorious, and I would love to sit down in front of the public and have a debate on this with the fire services, with TMR, with Moreton Bay Regional Council, Brisbane City Council, with the this crony group of consortium that the state government set up, the Premier set up, which is ex-government and ex-state government and council workers. I mean, God, how far does the corruption go? And nothing gets done. We can't keep allowing this, because it's complete destruction of the entire environment. We're not losing a few trees or a lot of trees. We lose everything. And then there's the problem. The Lantana still holds the high country. The seeds still float. but the seeds come back across that country like a flash. So the damage that it took that lantana to do in 50 years is only going to take 12 months to 2 years to be total domination and complete biodiversity loss. Complete. Nothing else, just complete. If you cared about climate change, or you cared about the animals, or you were a greenie at heart, or you believed in green principles, these governments are not your friends. And neither are the opposition parties. These people were there as this happened. I've been corresponding to the opposition party in Brisbane. They have made the right noises. Have they made a booking to go out and do the tour and actually have the discussions? No, not at all. In fact, I heard Tony Abbott Tony saying the other day that he was Perrott. Sorry, don't know why that name popped in my head. Saying that he was worried about the zoos all suffering from not enough food for the animals. You know, I'd been talking to him a long time ago about this, and we still haven't had that meeting. Yeah, there are far bigger fish to fry. Australia Zoo got given $45,000 to clean up lantana on their own lands. Australia Zoo knows how important it is for koalas to be lantana free. Koalas can't live where lantana is in stage 2 and stage 3. Have a look at some of the stuff I posted with 100 ticks on the koala, and the koala died a couple of hours later. That's normal. That's consistently all the time. Why isn't Australia Zoo kicking the Premier's teeth in? Why isn't Taronga Park Zoo kicking her teeth in? Why aren't these people raising the whistle? Why aren't all of the carers raising the whistle? Because they get funding from the government. And if you rock the boat with the government, you are out. And that's where we are here with this stuff. We have to get the word out there for people to understand what the infestations look like. And I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of videos showing what real lantana looks like in these environments and what it does to the environment itself. Very easy to understand. So I think we might leave that there. That's enough to understand the part that the state government and the councils play in this corruption. And all of it's illegal. Under the Biosecurity Act, it's illegal to allow lantana to be released into the environment. And it's illegal for lantana to be allowed to increase on the property it's on. There's no grey area in that. And it's illegal for that material to be released into somebody else's land. Now, what was the biosecurity's principal primary objective? It was to protect the environment. And yet we have grubs in biosecurity who are creating roadblocks to be able to get at the answers. And they need to be prosecuted under the CCC, same as the minister responsible for putting those roadblocks in place. We need to understand why these people allowed the councils to circumvent environmental law because of the costs. Every single breach of this stuff, when you've got 700 acres, right, and you start to do that math on what the yield is on 700 acres. So you could go 700 times the $2 million. There you go. It's a pretty big number, isn't it? And that's what we've got to deal with. The corruption that caused these environmental disasters, because the fires that are going to come off these things don't stop at your fence line. They don't honour your fence line. They come down the watercourses following these materials and straight through your family's lives and all of your animals and all of the animals in the Australian bushland, whatever's left. But they destroy every bit of the forestry that was there before. Anyway, I'm Gary, Lantana Removal Queensland, 0449 986 880. We operate out of southeast Queensland, and I have no equal in the world in lantana. And help me to take it to the state government and to the councils, and start taking it to the councils in your local area and tell me what they tell you. It's time you were properly educated in what your rights are and what your fence line is supposed to protect, and understand that all of these people have written you off. The Premier's wrote the entire state off. Only endangered species areas will be protected. But you can't protect endangered species areas when these materials flow straight down out of the mountainsides and out of the creeks straight into your properties. You're not protected. And yet the law is that you have to be protected and that those lands cannot be allowed to be consumed by this material. Come on, Premier, explain to me how you're meeting your legal obligations in stopping these materials being released into the environment. Tell me how TMR is stopping these materials being released into the environment. Tell me how the councils are doing it. Tell me how national parks are doing it. Just easy ones. Just tell me how they're doing it. It's as simple as that. It can't be hard. They've been supposed to be doing it for the last 4 years that I've been writing to you, and you've been aware of it. And you said it's never low risk. Trust me, it's never low. Well, why did you allow them to continue to tell the public it's low risk? The public can understand that mathematics. $5,000 for an acre of lantana. That acre of lantana expands at 400 plants per plant. There's 1,800 plants on an acre of lantana roughly. 720,000 plants. Divide it back by 1,800 to put it back into acres. That's 400 acres. Times 5,000, that's $2 million. That's an aggravated offence. And that's just for 1 acre that you created on other people's lands, off TMR's lands. There is no excuse for this. That's why my anger gets so bitter and so angry. You people are never going to change until you're removed from your offices and you're held accountable legally. You will never repent what you've caused to the environment. I've worked on those sides of those mountains, on Mount Me and Mount Glorious, and I've seen what exists in those lands. And there is no chance those people are going to survive. Your consortium of brainwashers was correct. If you don't get off those mountains, the moment there's smoke in the air, you're going to die. Your family is going to die. We are going to see massive losses of life in human lives, not just the animals lost and the lands lost. We're going to see 100-kilometre fires very soon. Very, very, very soon. I've done a reconnaissance all the way to Cairns, and the fires that are coming are going to make everything that's happened so far in the last 3 years look like a great day at a picnic. And the fire services are not going to protect you. They're not going to help you. They're not going to save you. None of you are going to be saved. Not one person is going to be saved by those entities. You saw that in the beginning of the year. They can't be in every place at once. It doesn't matter how many aircraft you buy. And there's the complete stupidity of Lantana aircraft and these whole things of the bushfires. You are letting the entire system be burnt to the ground. It wouldn't matter if you had 1,000 aircraft or 10,000 aircraft. It'd be like saying the cancer in a human body. You let the cancer consume it. It didn't matter what you did after that. It's all done. The only way forward is to stop these materials from claiming new lands and from connecting up. And none of that has ever been done under the councils and the state government. They've all circumvented the law, and it's time we had the court cases to examine why they did that. Who was it that sanctioned this? These people have been warned about it. The Prime Minister's been warned about it for 3 years. The Premiers have been warned about it for nearly 4 years. They've been shown the corruption. They've admitted they knew the corruption was there. The Premier of Queensland admits that she knew the corruption was there with Moreton Bay Regional Council, Brisbane City Council, Logan Council, Somerset Council, all of these councils, the national parks, TMR. She's admitted she knows it's there. Why were these people not taking action against these state government entities? Why? It is what they were put in place to do. Why didn't DNRME, who's supposed to protect the environment, why didn't they take action on all these things? In fact, they're actually using some of my work to actually look at what the after fire effects are. See, the Premier thinks that when these fires go through, all of the material is destroyed, and then she's off the hook. And in most of these areas, there is no other outcome that can happen except for the burning of these materials out of control, because there's that much material there, they can never burn them in a controlled burn. They can't do it. So the only way forward is for somebody to accidentally light the fires, which is arson, which will, I guarantee you, more of this is going to come back, and it's going to be actually state government employees lighting the fires, because they're the ones with the most to lose by this continuing there. But what the Premier hasn't worked out, and I said this to Moreton Bay Regional Council just the other day, and they pooed their pants quite badly. I can go into Google Earth and I can show the public exactly what the fire levels were before the fire. And I can go back there for 10 years. And then the question is, why did you allow these entities to circumvent environmental law and biosecurity law? Why did you do that? And why are you still allowing it to happen? Because I can go onto Google Earth and show those levels of increase continuously, and the levels of increase across those properties that were never allowed to be infested from those lands. I've got film footage in the last 2 years, hand film footage of the most horrendous increases into private property off those roadside infestations. Sooner or later, the people responsible for this are going to be held accountable. And I accept the Greens have been hoodwinked just like the rest of the public. And the rest of the public are terrified because they own a lot of that Lantana. But for your own safety, for your own good, you need to start taking action. You need to start spending money on it. Because the fires are going to be the fires are your first problem. And the fires have been proven in that last lot of fires to be 20 Ks, 50 Ks from you, even 100 kilometres from you. And they just travelled that distance. Once they're burning, and we're in the wrong conditions, you can't turn them off. You can't sit on this fence anymore and go, I just don't have the money to deal with this. Well, there's a huge amount of those people all the way through New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland that wish they had spent that money on that fire hazard reduction and removing those materials and eradicating the Lantana. And that's what you need to back me on this. We need to be eradicating the Lantana. You can't spend the money endlessly that the state government and the councils want you to spend and start dicking around with control measures and management when 15% will never succeed in anything at all. It isn't even a slowdown effect. You really need to clean up Lantana in one hit, gone, all of it, and then just concentrate on management. That's 40 plus years of experience, no equal in the world. And I'm telling you, we need that as our legal rights, because it's the cheapest method. It's the cheapest method for you by a long shot. And it's the only method that will give you any chance of surviving the fires when the fires come down through other people's properties and straight through you on their way to the next person's properties. You know, I want to save you, and I want to save your children, and I want to save our nation's heritage, because these criminals have been doing this for forever. National Parks employees are the greatest criminals in the world. TMR's criminals. The amount of devastation coming out of these lands, and these people saying, well, we don't have the funding to deal with it. You know, National Parks said to me, geez, it'd be buddy 2-3 years ago, oh, if we get some funding, we'll give you a call. I've not heard from them. Like biosecurity said, there's nothing to be learnt, because you'll just rub our nose in the fact that the material is there and then we have nowhere to hide. We can't say we didn't know it was as bad as that. Well, the councils were supposed to tell biosecurity it was as bad as that. But see, the councils weren't training any staff to say, hey, listen, this is how much money this costs. This is innocent people's properties being destroyed throughout the entire Shire because we say we're too frightened to contact TMR. It was illegal for you to allow TMR to do it in the first place. Illegal. It wasn't just not a good idea. It was illegal. So that level of corruption should have a proper royal commission into the level of corruption. And those, well, look, if we can't get those entities to act legally, then we should sack the whole lot. Just get rid of each one of those departments. Rebuild it over again. There's no point in having them. They're just a huge loss of money to all of us in something that we can't do anything with. So that's my what's the name for you today. I hope that you can make sense of a lot of the materials and a lot of those things there. and that you can understand where I am coming from. And that from this you can contact me. I'm going to start letterbox dropping properties that are being infested by roadside infestations, and try to put a class action together the same as taking this through the Triple C. We'll get TMR's attention when they are handed bills for $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 on each individual property. It won't take long before it gets their attention, and then we've got to understand why the councils didn't take action on that, and then why the councils were allowing these people to destroy your family's lives and place your families in horrific risk from these fires that are coming through there. Anyway, once again, I'm Gary from Lantana Removal, Queensland. I've got 40 plus years of experience in permanent eradication of lantana. I have no equal in the world, and it's the cheapest option to be able to do it. Poisons don't work, mulching doesn't work, all those other systems don't work. You need to deal with lantana on an eradication basis, not on a management basis. There is no management in lantana. You've got to invest in the cheapest option possible that works, and that is ours, and offers the best outcomes. Even if you take over the work after we've done the initial treatment, that's the cheapest and best options, but there is no shortcuts for this. Otherwise, you just keep spending year after year after year. Anyway, we're in Queensland, but we go anywhere the work is. Talk to you later, and stay safe, and please do something before the fires come. They're already starting up here as we speak after those westerly winds. Bye-bye. Catch us next time.